Good evening, and welcome to NLCS Dubai's first very own TEDxYouth event. When I first started organizing this TEDx event about a year ago, I didn't even imagine that our speakers would end up talking to you online. But as such, everything changes so quickly nowadays. Living through this period of endless social, economic, environmental, political, and cultural change, we always have to adapt, we have to innovate. And this is why our first TEDx event here in NLCS Dubai is on the theme of innovation. Destroying the box, unlocking innovative ideas. Think about it, innovation is everywhere. In fact, TED itself is an innovation. First created in 1984, TED started as a one-off conference about technology, entertainment, and design. However, the unique style and innovative format of TED caught many people's eyes, and now TED is a viral video phenomenon and a worldwide community of passionate people. And you are joining our journey of innovation by listening to our 7 amazing speakers. American writer Mark Twain once said that wisdom is the reward you get for a lifetime of listening when you would rather have talked. So welcome to you all, and I sincerely hope you enjoy.
My name is Deepak Malhotra. I became a governor earlier this year at NLCS Dubai. Tell you a bit about my background with the school. My daughter Mahi, age 6, she was pupil number 1. And Sami, age 12, was one of the first pupils as well at the school. And my wife Neetu also works there in junior reception. So I've been asked to speak about innovation. What does innovation mean? Innovation has different meanings to different people. But for me, it's something very deep and very personal. I'm a type 1 diabetic who was diagnosed 25 years ago. And I've seen how innovation, particularly in recent years, has changed my quality of life. I'll stand up and show you how. I have an insulin pump here. The insulin pumps put insulin in me, and it's all automated through an app on my phone. I have an app called Loot. And what this app does here, it enables my insulin delivery to be automated via my phone, connected to a sensor here on my stomach. What does this mean? This means less chance of any diabetic problems, better control, less issues with my diabetes, and generally just feeling better. So if you think about innovation, don't just think about it as social media, Facebook, Instagram, and whatever else the youngsters of today like to use. To me, innovation is actually about improving quality of life. And to me, the ability for me to control my diabetes, live a full and active life, has been massively improved by innovation. So I thought I'd just share with my experience, and I hope you will learn something from this. Thank you.
Before commencing with the event, we would like to introduce our wonderful speakers who have worked incredibly hard and come up with spectacular ideas. Our first speaker will be Eugene, who will be focusing on the aspect of daydreaming and how it could potentially serve innovation. Next, Tammy, a special guest from our sister school in London, will be exploring how to overcome the gender pay gap. Following this, Sanat will be presenting the idea of thinking inside the box. Ellie Cheyun will be portraying the role that technology will have in the next 20 years of our lives. And then Na-Young from our school in Jeju will discuss the link between culture and innovation. After this, Abdul Wahab will be demonstrating the positives and negatives of the introduction of VAR into English Premier League football. Lastly, we will have Enzo, who will end our event with an innovation around the idea of upcycling. We hope you enjoy NLCS Dubai's TEDxYouth event. Thank you.
Focus, focus, focus. As a student, I spend most of my time concentrating on my work. And I suppose that you will spend the majority of your time focusing on your work as well. I'm pretty sure that everyone here knows concentrating on your work will improve your productivity, and therefore it is important to stay on task. However, have you ever just wandered off into the thoughts in your mind? Well, yes, I have, and that is what we call daydream. Defined as a series of pleasant thoughts that distract one's attention from the present. Then, what does daydreaming have something to do with innovation? Does an innovation require concentration? Well, let's dive into the world of daydreams. Before I start talking about why we should daydream, let's take a look at how many people daydream and who they are. It is commonly known that children daydream a lot, but most people think adults don't. So Harvard researchers gathered more than 2,200 adults between the ages of 18 and 88. And they sent them regular text messages asking them what they were doing and thinking. Surprisingly, the results showed that the participants' minds were wandering around for 46.9% of the time. They were often into positive thoughts, like piloting an aircraft or inventing a new kind of space travel. Therefore, it is clear that people love to daydream, no matter how old they are. However, even though so many people daydream, people still have the misunderstanding that daydreaming is unproductive and useless. When one is daydreaming, it might seem like the person is not focusing and just wasting their time. However, there are various reasons why we have to daydream. First, did you know that daydreaming actually activates our brain? University of Florida's psychiatrist, Eugenia Roth, has stated that as our minds wander, different parts of our brain activate, accessing information that may have been previously dormant or out of reach. Roth also said that this accounts for creativity, insights of wisdom, and oftentimes solutions to problems that one has never thought of. As Roth said, when we daydream, different parts of our brain activate, and one of them is called the default mode network. The default mode network, also known as the DMN, is a large-scale brain network of interacting brain regions, which are known to have the activity highly correlated with each other and distinct from other networks in the brain. The DMN activates when the brain is involved in specific tasks like cogitating self or others, remembering past memories, and making future simulations. Therefore, by the activation of DMN, it is clear that daydreaming activates our brain. Second, the people who daydream are known to have more efficient brains. Eric Schumacher, a psychology professor from Georgia Institute of Technology, did a research with his students and colleagues. They measured the brain systems of more than 100 people while they lay in the MRI machine. He instructed the participants to focus on a stationary fixation point for 5 minutes. Then, he found out that the brain patterns during an awake, resting state is related to the cognitive abilities, which are the abilities to solve problems, comprehend complex ideas, and learn from experiences. He then analyzed the data with the test results that showed the participants' intellectual and creativity. He also made the participants do a questionnaire about how often and how much they daydream. Astonishingly, the results showed that the participants who reported more frequent daydreaming scored higher on their intellectual and creative abilities. They also showed more efficient brain systems measured in the MRI machine. Schumacher says higher efficiency means more capacity to think, and the brain may move on to unrelated thoughts when performing easy tasks. Therefore, the people who daydream are the ones that are capable of thinking more than others, and that is why and how they can daydream. Third, an innovative idea is an idea that others wouldn't have thought of before. When you are trying to come up with an idea, it is important not to push yourself too hard or force yourself to concentrate. Research suggests that thinking about an issue too methodically is often a detriment to problem solving because the brain blocks out all the information and thoughts that are considered irrelevant. And here, the thoughts that are considered irrelevant are usually the thoughts that are innovative. Those thoughts are blocked out just because they are too different from what the brain is used to thinking of. So, rather than forcing yourself to become innovative, it is way easier to just let go of all the stressful thoughts and let your mind flow. Then, you will be able to come to that aha moment when the unique idea pops up. People tend to think innovation as something that they cannot achieve. They tend to think innovation as a huge box that they cannot destroy. However, is innovation hard? Sorry, let me do it again. However, is daydreaming hard? No, not at all. In fact, I am guessing that some of you were daydreaming during my talk. And that means that innovation is also not so hard. So, let's try this in our lives. Close your eyes if it helps you, and don't stress yourself to come up with an idea. Let your mind flow to wherever it wants to go. It might be a past memory, image of an ideal future, or maybe a sparkling idea. Anyone can become the innovator with the power of daydreaming. Therefore, just let your mind flow into the world of daydreams. Thank you.
In primary school, when we were asked what we wanted to do when we were older, my hand shot up and the answer that came out of my mouth was, rather embarrassingly, I want to work in the city and make the big bucks. I'm Tammy Schwartzman. I'm delighted to talk to you about how innovation can help eradicate the gender pay gap. Although at the time there seems to be no correlation between my confident statement about what I wanted my future to look like and my classmates as they expressed their hopes of being teachers, actors and politicians, there is actually one unmistakable similarity. For every $1 our male counterparts would make in any one of the jobs we hope to take up, we would only earn 78 cents, meaning we could expect to earn on average $300,000 less than men in our working lives. This isn't just the case in a few companies, but 78% of companies pay men more than women. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the gender pay gap. The difference between the pay men and women receive for doing the exact same job. The gender pay gap is simply the definition of sexism and discrimination in action. And so its eradication is no longer a possibility, but an imperative. I believe the solution lies within innovation. So I'm going to talk to you about how to eradicate the gender pay gap in terms of innovation, to stop the naivety of your hopeful youngsters like myself and encourage change. Before we start to look at how innovation can help eradicate the gender pay gap, let's first look at the causes of it. Let's go all the way back to 340 BC, the year in which Aristotle made his claim that women were simply deformed males. Throughout history, women have been looked at as the inferior parts in society, granted the role of being the cleaner, cook and carer rather than the breadwinner. To this day, women are still devalued, especially within the workplace, where they are classified as temperamental due to the effects of periods and pregnancy, and somewhat inflexible due to the commitments of motherhood. Everything I can possibly say is put perfectly in the book Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, where Catherine Meyer puts it as, smashing your head against the glass ceiling is a risky business, and not only because it can leave you with a headache. She explains how women are faced with high standards and expectations, which if reached, leave one with the backlash of female accomplishment. So the gender pay gap is not a consequence of a lack of determination and commitment from a female perspective, but a lack of understanding and passion for the benefits of pay parity within the rest of society. This has to change. In the short term, in times when companies are pressured by the voice of social media's fight against inequality, or progressive movements such as the Me Too campaign, they panic. They panic so much that they start offering high starting wages to attract women, wages which they cannot keep up with. They may even revamp their website with sections devoted to their commitment to diversity, as seen on the homepages of Lloyds, RBS and HSBC. But these words are not being actioned. Action needs to take place. Companies need to understand why there is a gender pay gap for them to then solve it. This should be done in the most sustainable way, through innovation. Using artificial intelligence, companies can identify patterns of pay where employees with the pronoun he are benefiting more than that of the pronoun she. Using this data, managers can be actively informed of disparity and therefore forced to take action in making sure women and men are paid the same. So, greater employment of innovation leads to greater recognition of where inequality is functioning. This can also be applied to the gender gap, in which there are fewer women than men in the workforce. If companies incentivise female employment, where artificial intelligence recognises there are fewer women working, companies can encourage women to take up work in these areas. The value of this work will be recognised and the gender pay gap will eventually be eradicated. Of course, this is easier said than done, but the contribution of a woman's work has already been proven statistically. For example, in the book of the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, she explains how women have a 5% higher ethic of care than men, meaning more rounded, less risky business decisions will be made. What's more is that women make up 70 to 80% of purchase decisions, and so, by having a workforce that reflects your consumers, productivity will undoubtedly benefit. In the long term, businesses will be forced to pay men and women equally, after seeing the benefits. It has even been estimated that global GDP would increase by 5.3 trillion by 2025 by closing the gender pay gap by just 25%. But that is just one way in which innovation could help eradicate the gender pay gap. Another way is by encouraging flexible working. Flexible working inspires a more diverse workforce, one where employees are not penalised for having to pick up their children at 4 or having to make dinner for their family at 6. This is not innovation in the sense of technology, but innovation in terms of one's mindset. CEOs, managers and employees move away from thinking that the traditional 9-to-5 workday is the only acceptable workday, where employees tap into and out of the office, but to a more accepting mindset that sees the advantages of flexible working. Women will have greater accessibility to work and therefore will be more greatly incentivised to partake. As before, with more women in the workforce, the voice for equal play will only get louder. In solving the gender gap, the pressure on board members to reduce the gender pay gap will surely follow. For example, Barclays, a leading UK bank, has spent years encouraging greater female participation in their workforce with programmes such as the Women's Initiative Network and the He for She campaign. This has led to their workforce being composed of 52% females and 48% males, a great achievement. But it doesn't stop there. Currently, women within Barclays are now benefiting more than men in terms of bonuses, in that 93.5% of women have gained a bonus in comparison to 91.4% of men. This shows that by closing the gender gap, the gender pay gap follows. Okay, let's take innovation even further. Why aren't we creating jobs only for women, or even companies only for women? Surely, if jobs are only for women, a gender pay gap can't exist. Jobs exist only for men. For example, it was only in 2016 that the United States changed its policy to allow women to serve in all combat divisions of the armed forces, before only men were allowed. You never read headlines that show a policy change allowing for men to partake in certain sectors of the workforce. You only see sectors opening up to women. So let's flip it. Let's make headlines. Let's create new jobs, new companies, new institutions solely for women. These could range from female-only cab drivers who only drive women, or even a law firm who only employ women. To me, this sounds like the simplest and most achievable solution. But isn't this unfair for men? By benefiting women, we are doing simply the exact same to men that has been done to us for years, stripping them of equal opportunity. So, although innovation seems to hold the key to our future in eradicating the gender pay gap, we have to be careful, because when it is mishandled, it may create even more inequality than what we started with. A FTSE 100 chairman said, "I'm sick of talking about the gender pay gap. We've done that." But actually, we haven't. Women are paid less than men in every one of the 149 countries looked at by the World Economic Forum. So we need to act. Innovation is about acting in the present to reap the benefits in the future. And so with this in mind, I hope I've motivated you, whatever age or gender you are, to speak up in an attempt to eradicate the gender pay gap using an innovative mindset. Thank you for listening.
I'm fairly sure that almost everyone in the audience has come across the phrase, "it's important to think outside the box," at least once in their lives. But have we ever stopped to consider why we were encouraged to do so, and whether this phenomenon has now become counterproductive? While researching around this topic, and once more finding myself on the notorious platform of Google, I surprisingly found a lot more information regarding thinking inside the box, and why it is even more beneficial than thinking outside the box. So the question is, why am I here proposing quite an absurd idea that is vaguely pessimistic? Well, it's not as absurd as it seems. Christopher Peterson, a psychology professor at the University of Michigan, writes in Psychology Today a view you may seem to agree with, which is, thinking outside the box is cliched. In fact, the phrase is almost thinking inside the box. This brings me to another more complex theory. If everyone begins to think outside the box, then the concept would turn into a generic concept, essentially classifying itself as thinking inside the box. A prime example would be the beautiful city we live in, Dubai, which is truly one of a kind. With its rapid growth, amazing infrastructure, and its reputation as a record breaker, it's safe to say Dubai has achieved what all cities strive for. You may ask, is that thinking inside the box? Looking at the dictionary definition of thinking outside the box, we can see that it states, to think in an original or creative way. So this means that Dubai was in fact a city that was formed on thinking outside the box. Its rapid growth and booming tourism rates show that. I could go on and on, but you get the idea. So look at it this way.
If we get a project or something along those lines, especially in school, and the teacher tells you to think outside the box, and if the whole class does a crazy and unique presentation, at first it would seem quite fun and interesting. However, if the whole class does this, then eventually watching everyone do a very crazy PowerPoint, you would likely get very bored, and so much that maybe a generic but informative PowerPoint would really be a breath of fresh air. Another way to look at this is to quote, "Never be afraid to be a poppy in a field of daffodils." Quoted by Michaela de Prince, I'm convinced you've heard a similar quote when standing out of the crowd. But again, look at it this way. If everyone decides to be a poppy in a field of daffodils, then suddenly our field of daffodils has turned into a field of poppies. Realistically though, not everyone is going to do the exact same PowerPoint in the scenario I just described. Well, unless they were telepathic. And let's be honest, when have we ever enjoyed any type of presentation at school? This brings me to my next point. If everyone tried to be different or stick out, the literal meaning for now, we would all really be a field of colorful and unique flowers. Instead of going from a poppy in a field of daffodils to everyone being poppies, we would really, since we all have genetic uniqueness and different thought processes, stand out and showcase our differences. Let's take a step back here. What exactly am I trying to get at? Well, we live in a society where we increasingly find ourselves looking down on following the crowd, and yet simultaneously on being different. But how does this link to my idea of how thinking outside the box is counterproductive? If we try to innovate while hiding away behind a wall, we won't get very far, because we're too busy trying to do the exact opposite with ourselves. We need to be different to make a difference. One person can't carry the world alone. A similar idea was proposed by John Spencer at TEDxYouth on the power of limitations. Really, they make you more creative. How? In that talk, he showed an anecdote about how his son wanted a bedtime story with a wizard, with no powers, and how it also had to include dragons, robots, and zombies. In order to create a fun story, he and his wife decided to make the non-magical wizard's setbacks into his strengths. This concept can also be applied to real life. Have you ever thought about the process of an invention? Now, as someone who is not an inventor so far, I can't say I know the exact scientific thought process behind creating an invention. But I can say this. People who are credited with certain inventions very likely, and if not likely, when they did do so, to overcome limitations that they and we faced at the time. If we're still not with me, then look at the microwave. Percy Spencer did create the modern microwave because of a limitation we face, which is food cooling too fast. So by a limitation being forced on us, we are then forced to think creatively to overcome these barriers. Keeping the two in mind, our concept may not be about a box at all. In fact, it's all about how we collectively process and face certain challenges. It's also about how we have to think innovatively to overcome them and gain progress. This progress can then be defined as accepting our differences, linking to our field of flowers idea. In summary, we need to look around and think of how we can stop limiting ourselves by being scared to show ourselves. And I believe that then, together with the right mindset, together you and I can change the world.
Many innovations created in the past solved the difficulties people experienced in their lives. And I cannot imagine a world without the internet, or even phones, as I was born 16 years ago when both already existed. The internet has changed virtually every aspect of our lives, from the way we communicate to the way we consume news, shop, navigate, and entertain ourselves. Plus, social media, one of the most influential applications on the internet, was not the same. The closest thing there was to modern-day social media was AOL Instant Messengers and do-it-yourself GeoCities web pages. 20 years later, it is clear and obvious how much our world has changed. But what about 20 years from now on? Not too long ago, just before around 20 years, the world was completely different. If you can remember the world 20 years ago, what was it like? What was so different about it? And if you can name one thing that you think has changed the most, what would it be? Incredible progress and innovations has filled the past 2 decades, creating numerous changes in not only the way people live, but also in the way they think about their past, present, and future. An example of a physical change record is that the best iPhone model used to change every 2 years in the past. Now we know it changes almost every half a year, and the rate of production of devices seems to increase rapidly with the developments in technology. I used to believe that the current rate of development in devices was almost unnecessary. Yet 2020 was a year that I benefited and learned the needs of modern technology. In fact, 2020 was not the worst year for me, it was one of the most disastrous years of the society. Fires, crashes, locust storm outbreaks, earthquakes, and of course, the coronavirus pandemic, all happening at the same time. As soon as lockdown started, my daily routine began like this. I woke up, I sat on my desk, and I spent the next 7 or more hours with my laptop screen. After school hours, I would repeat a very similar routine, but also with my device. Even if it was simply for entertainment purposes, never in my life have I hated staring at the screen so much for such a long time. Now, since the previous, past innovations created solve the difficulties people experience, a new creation with the phrase, "Say goodbye to your screens," will solve the challenges people like me are currently facing. Today's virtual reality headsets, also known as VR headsets, are bulky and isolating. They are heavy, they cover almost half of your face, they don't let air in, and most of all, they are uncomfortable, especially when worn for a long period of time. In the future, light-filled displays will eliminate the need for a display or a headset, projecting 4D images directly onto your eyes from the point of focus. These devices may eventually be as simple as a pair of lenses, and they are added onto the current technologies today to develop it even further. For example, businesses and startups are working on solutions that provide a more interactive solution to light-filled displays as they are on the rise for media, entertainment, and even education. The ability to interact with projected images, such as a hologram on a virtual screen, enables control and manipulation of pictures. It is then adjusted according to the viewer's viewpoint, stimulating the field of view of an actual window. This current technology is used in the modern society today in special occasions and circumstances, like trade fairs and even museums. Another example that you might have heard of that uses light-filled displays is holograms. Light-filled displays in the future will reduce the cost of holography, enabling more businesses and startups to build solutions incorporating it. These provide a more spatial and angular resolution for creating a more realistic hologram. Moreover, a very similar but quite different type, called practical hologram, develop a transparent display and projection that turns any transparent media of glass or plastic into an immersive display. This enables future generations to use light-filled displays in commercial buildings, automotive glass, among other applications. Advancements in optical fabrication and computational models of human perception are enabling new display technologies. In the future, you might be able to see a live 4D performance of your favorite singer right in front of you without a physical screen blocking in between you and the projection of the singer. Or you might even be able to see a favorite movie scene of yours, dive into it, be the main character, and surrounded by the landscape you have seen over a movie screen in the cinemas. This will completely change the source of entertainment, creating numerous changes in the business industry, the economy, the world, and the human behavior. Innovations and new technology will create a massive change in the next 20 or more years, just like it did during the past 20 years. as the next or even the current young generation with displays replace TVs, iPads, and phone screens, the $3 trillion electronics industry will completely reinvent itself. Manufacturing jobs, touted by politicians, loaded with subsidies, proved to be useful for a time, but will ultimately be swept aside by the same processes that rendered previous jobs out of date. I believe that unless our species survives forever, there is not a chance that ideas will ever run out. Original ideas come from previous creations and variations and combinations of previous ideas. Hence, there is simply no limit to the possibilities. Every discovery and improvement will create a new sense of possibility and probability. So after 20, 30, or 40 or more years, who knows how different our world might look like? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nang Son, Year 12 from NLCS. Today, I'm going to present you about the cultural innovation in Korea regarding its gradual paradigm shifts all the way from conservatism to liberalism. So, let's start with the question. How can we be innovative whilst maintaining the culturally valuable conventions? If we merge red and blue together, we end up with purple. It's quite obvious, right? Then, what would happen if we merge conservation and innovation? We will end up with sustainable development. This is what exactly happened in Korea. Conservatism merged with liberalism and induced a sustainable cultural innovation. Cultural innovation. Well, first of all, what does culture mean to you? According to my own definition, culture is a product of the accumulation of social norms within various fields, such as the arts, ideologies, urban politics. Then, what does innovation mean? Again, I define innovation as something like a paradigm shift, whereby the previous paradigm is totally replaced by a newly emerged paradigm. So, based on my own definition, cultural innovation simply means the changes in society. Let me put our country, Korea, in the context of cultural innovation. Back in Joseon Dynasty, conservatism served as a paradigm of Korean society, and Confucianism served as the main instrument to strictly operate Joseon Dynasty under conservative traditional values. Confucianism induced a strong sense of collective community, which discarded individual freedom. It also emphasized the notion of isolationist economic policies, which removed the chances to interact with the foreign markets, and this was why the Korean soldiers were fighting with arrows on horses, whilst the Japanese soldiers had guns during the Indian War back in 1592. Also, Confucianism induced a legal social ranking system, which imposed a hierarchy upon individuals by inheritance of the family. And still, there was an emphasis of respecting the elders, since they were regarded as the authoritative figures due to their long duration of experience of a certain field. So, based on these social circumstances, Confucianism was not just simply a popular culture amongst the society. It was a social norm to follow. It was a rule to abide by. However, this popular culture was totally dismantled by the emergence of liberalism, which innovated Korea from conservatism to liberalism. Liberalism is a accumulated doctrine that values individual freedom over collective community and is open to new ideas, discarding the traditional values. Liberalism shifted the Korean society by emphasizing individual freedom, and as a consequence, people tended to abide by the so-called Western liberalism, which made them value their own self-identity over the collective community. It also discarded the previous isolationist economic policies and induced internationalism within the economy, which eventually catalyzed Korea to become one of the leading figures in IT. And this is how we got the access to fast Wi-Fi. Last but not least, liberalism emphasized the notion of egalitarianism, and this dismantled the legal hierarchy system. And since then, there was no such legal system that strictly operated one's hierarchy upon a society. However, due to the spread of capitalism, which emphasized individuals' income, the social financial disparity between people escalated, and therefore, one's wealth determined one's hierarchy within a society. So, based on these social circumstances, was the cultural innovation truly beneficial in Korea? Personally, I don't think so. Although it improved our economic stance upon the global scope increasingly, as a trade-off, we lost of Korean traditional values. This binary impact emphasized the fact that there is a trade-off of certain development by losing some values. Relating to the recent crisis of coronavirus, people who valued the collective community remained wearing their masks and remained quarantined to prevent the further secondary infection. On the other hand, people who valued their own self-dignity just further contributed to spread the virus. What about our cultural heritage? Well, the Korean Oriental method of medication is gradually now replaced by the Western chemical medication. I'm not saying that these chemical medicines are bad, but I just simply believe that the Oriental method is better for our health as a long term compared to these chemicals. Some people argue that these Oriental methods are superstitious, but there are numerous cases that actually benefited from this method, so I still believe that it is better than the chemicals. Some people also argue that the economic prosperity was firmly positive. Really? Who in this room watched the recent movie Parasite, which won the Oscar? As a spoiler alert, but as the movie states, the increasing notion of capitalism imposed a glass ceiling upon individuals based on their own wealth, which indicated their own hierarchy upon the society. So, let me re-ask the question. Was this cultural innovation really beneficial to Korea? For future sustainable cultural innovation in Korea, I strongly believe that we have to follow these 3 rules. Firstly, we should pursue our own individual colors by having self-confidence whilst embracing the social norm by respecting the others. Secondly, we have to preserve our own cultural heritage whilst embracing the foreign technologies by preserving the obsolete traditional conventions and fusing our valuable conventions into the foreign technology. Third, we should definitely place ourselves upon the implicit social hierarchy by breaking the glass ceilings based on our wealth and also prevent the abuse of our own authority to denounce the others. This balance between the traditional conventions and the innovative foreign cultures will allow us to both reflect upon our own history and direct our unknown future towards the sustainable cultural development. So, today, I've navigated all the way from the conservative values during Joseon Dynasty towards the liberalism in modern Korea, and demonstrated how this liberalism innovated the Korean culture. Based on the case of Korea and my presentation, I want to strongly address the fact that for the future sustainable development through cultural innovation, we should be innovative whilst preserving the culturally valuable conventions. Thank you for listening.
Hello, and welcome to my TED Talk on human error and decision making. How can we use technology positively in order to eliminate human error? And how can we use it in the most efficient and effective way in our decision making? I'm very passionate about football, and in recent years I've observed how technology has been used to try and limit human error in decision making, primarily the decisions of referees on the football pitch. Over the past decade, the two most influential technological advancements in football have been virtual assistant referee, or VAR, and goal line technology. Firstly, goal line technology involves using a system called Hawkeye, which uses different camera angles to calculate where a ball has ended up. VAR involves incorporating a fifth referee who monitors the game through a series of screens and is able to replay what has happened on a pitch to assist the referee in making a decision of whether it is a penalty, a red card, or offside, and so on. These technologies have been created to try and improve the fairness of the game and to eliminate bias. If a goal passed the line before and was not allowed, we would not have the same problem if that happened again in the present. So how have these technological advancements changed the football experience? Just recently I was watching a game in the Premier League between Liverpool and Everton, two fierce rivals in the city of Liverpool. The match was 2-2 and it was the final 2 minutes. And then a goal was scored and Liverpool fans like me across the world were celebrating over the certain victory over our rivals. But was it a victory? No. A VAR check came in and the decision was offside, by a few meters quite literally. Hundreds of decisions similar to this have happened since the appointment of VAR in the Premier League in August 2019. These decision overturns have led to people changing the way they see football. For example, some people do not celebrate after a goal due to the fear that a VAR decision will overturn it. It just ruins the passion that is meant to be linked with the game and puts people off from spending 2 hours of their time to watch a game that may ultimately lead to their frustration. We could also argue that the opposing fans benefit from this decision, and therefore it is a good thing if we look at this in a different perspective. One of the ways we can solve the controversy of VAR is by creating leeway to a moral extent. We can use human judgment and common sense to allow the decisions to be more lenient and still keep the passion that should remain in the sport. The referees need to make sure that they are going over the screens more often in order to get a second opinion on the decision. Why should we use technology to help us reach a decision? During decision making, humans are influenced by different factors which ultimately leads them to making their final decision. These factors include past experiences, cognitive bias, the way we interpret things as a result of what is happening in the world around us, escalation of commitment and sunk outcomes, where we try and think optimistically in the hope that some good will come out of it, individual differences such as age and socio-economic status, and a belief in personal relevance, where the decision matters to the individual. Using technology allows us to avoid these factors from influencing our final decision, and this could then lead to a more fair and just society, where the subjectiveness of a person does not matter. One of the ways we are assisted with our decision making is through the use of AI. You may not realize, but we use AI all the time in our day-to-day lives. You might have thought Siri or Google Assistant was just a simple voice recognition, but in fact this is one of the more simpler versions of AI. Driverless trains such as the metro here in Dubai is in fact an example of AI. So why is AI so effective in decision making? AI is meant to replicate a human cognitive system without all the biases and errors involved in the process. What makes AI really intelligent is that it has the ability to learn and replicate things that it has seen or experienced. Furthermore, as we all know, AI does not experience fatigue the way a human does, and therefore can participate in more tasks during a shorter span of time. Overall, AI makes a limited amount of error and is therefore extremely efficient. What AI lacks, however, is the judgment that humans have. The open-minded, deliberative thoughts which only humans can ever have. We cannot teach AI what humans have learned and passed down genetically over thousands of years. The human brain cannot be replicated, as each brain is unique and has different components which you cannot find anywhere else. However, relying on technology alone is not always the way forward. A technical flaw could lead to detrimental loss in many different ways. And it is important to create a balance between human intuition and technology when we're trying to address certain problems. VAR, as an example, is supposed to be an assistant and is not there to take the role of a referee. The technology should only be used once a referee is unable to reach a decision, and this is the way we should use technology in real life. As a society, we are using technology without knowing the long-term effects, as we are always looking for short-term improvements without looking at the bigger picture. Could this mean that in the future we become over-reliant on technology and are not able to think for ourselves? In simpler terms, could we see the world being taken over by technology? Some could point out that our lives are already being taken over by technology. We use our devices to write notes, essays, make music, and even create art. My last point goes to the question of whether we can trust technology, such as AI, with our decisions. And by that, I do not mean privacy or concepts relating to that. AI could have a sort of bias, but for mine. This is where the topic of debate, called ethical AI, comes in. Ethical AI is the principle of designing artificially intelligent systems using codes of conduct that ensure an automated system is able to respond to situations in an ethical way. For that, we turn to machine ethics, which is concerned with the process of adding moral behaviors to AI machines. For example, a developer could create a robot that uses AI to assist a person in picking their ideal pet. However, if the developer has had an unpleasant past experience with dogs, they may develop the AI in a way that dogs are not an option or very hard to obtain. So what is our solution? What we need is a balance between human intuition and technology. We should be using technology to assist us in making decisions and not outrightly making our decisions. Technology should be used to eliminate as much human error as possible, but should not take over in solving all our problems. With the right combination between human judgment and technological efficiency, we could ultimately make our decision making extremely effective in the future. Thank you.
To innovate is not just a verb, it's a different way of living, one that encourages the exploration of different concepts and how these can be combined for the betterment of the human race. I have been on the chase for the next $1 million idea, which could revolutionize the world. However, as I am a very conscious person, I started to overthink about how that product may affect the people around it, and how hard it is to manufacture anything with a low carbon footprint. This caused me a huge headache, so I decided to go for a walk. While doing so, this is what I saw. A lot of construction material disposed in the desert. Around 569 million tons of construction materials such as brick, wood, lead, and granite are disposed each year in landfills in the United States only. I then started to wonder, how have we reached a point where we don't fully utilize our raw materials, and instead of storing them, we simply dispose of them? This made me remember how in Brazil people always attempt to find new creative use for a product which would be simply disposed of in Dubai. This simple concept is called upcycling. Then I set myself a challenge. I was to go to the same place where I encountered the disposed materials, choose one, take it home, and attempt to create something out of waste. I chose a completely eroded cable reel as shown on the screen. After thorough planning and brainstorming, I came to the idea of making something that is able to sustain life. This is because of the recent growth of unsustained deforestation and how that is an extremely damaging process not only to the environment but also to our ever-doubting sustainable future. A new report from Global Forest Watch has found that an area of forest the size of the UK is deforested each year. This report did not even count the numerous fires in the Amazon during 2019. Regardless, it is extremely hard to be hopeful or even be eager to change, as being sustainable is much harder than to not be sustainable. This is furthered when the results of mass loss of worldwide fauna and flora are not instant and not visible for most people, as more of us migrate to urban areas. Therefore, many people are misinformed. Keeping that all in mind, I decided to build a plant vase. So, first, I had to use a can of WD-40 to ease the joints of the bolts so I could finally disassemble the structure of the cable reel. Then, I left the same bolts and iron rods soaking overnight in a bucket filled with WD-40, water, and salt. This disintegrated most of the rust, which allowed me to reuse the same parts when assembling the vase. I then had to hand wash the wood and leave it drying outside for about 5 hours. Then, I decided to paint the wood with blue and green as they are closely related to sustainability. Finally, I painted how the environment which the cable reel was found should look like. The final product is what you now see on the screen. I can tell you that it was not easy to get it to that perfect shiny state, where one could even think it is an overpriced piece of furniture you can buy at Crate and Barrel. This was left on the desert to rot, to be disintegrated to nothing, all because unfortunately some construction companies could not be bothered to keep track of their own materials. Perhaps this is mirrored throughout society. I'm not here to blame anyone, because that is just a waste of time, which we're running out of. I am here because I want to emphasize on the importance of creating new business models that are not only sustainable, but also aim to improve its surrounding communities, as I believe this is how business must operate in the near future. However, we're currently stuck in a mindset that innovation has to be within a new shiny product that will make our lives easier than before. I don't believe any of that, and neither should you. The consequences for this system are being detrimental for us. Water supplies are becoming scarce, temperatures are rising. It came to the point that banks are buying water reserves as an investment because of how scarce water will become. I don't believe we're hopeless, but it becomes quite discouraging when a lot of people do not worry or even attempt to make an effort because they believe that the next generation will be able to magically solve it. And just like anything, all of this will take time, a lot of failure, until we're able to find a system of sustainable growth. But I believe that before producing from any raw sources, we should repurpose everything we have already dumped. Perhaps when we're able to focus on unleashing our creativity to upcycle so many of our quote-unquote old products, we may be able to innovate to a point that we can turn garbage into something that sustains life. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chandan Shah and I'm a teacher here at NLCS Dubai. I'm here to say a few thank yous to people without whom this event would not have been possible today. Firstly, I'd like to thank Deepak for taking time out to do the opening address. I also want to thank Shirley for the beautiful poster and Anant for the promo video that you saw at the start. Without the following people working behind the scenes today, this event would not have come together the way it did. So thank you to Mr. Smith for the lighting, Cameron for the filming and editing of the video, and Maria for the marketing. Some members of staff across the NLCS schools have liaised with us to allow the inclusion of 3 of our 4 NLCS schools. So thank you to Mr. Waddington at NLCS UK, Mr. Tamlin at NLCS Jeju, and Mr. Zambanini at NLCS Dubai. Of course, without our speakers, we would not have actually had an event. So thank you to Sanat, Eugene, Abdul Wahab, and Eli Chayon from NLCS Dubai, Enzo, our alumnus, and Tammy and Noyoung from NLCS UK and Jeju respectively. And finally, 2 students who have worked tirelessly and have been extremely flexible and resilient in these uncertain times, Sam and Sakina, without whom this event would really have not come together. Thank you both for your hours of planning and work you've put in. Have a lovely day wherever in the world you are watching from. Stay safe and keep healthy. And most importantly, let the innovations shine. Thank you.